Aemon the Dragonknight is one of the most famous characters in the in-world history of A Song of Ice and Fire, mentioned more than 30 times in the main series and counting. But who was he, and why is he so important? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel, well, if you've been here a while, you know the rest of this intro, so let's move on. And if you're new, welcome. And this video is another collaboration with the wonderful History of Westeros. Please do check out their amazing YouTube channel and podcast. There's a link in the description. In Bran's second chapter in the first book, we find him daydreaming about stories of knighthood, and that someday he'll be in the Kingsguard. A few chapters later is Sansa's first, and she too is thinking of her favourite stories, daydreaming of chivalry and romance. It's easy to forget how young they are after all they've gone through since then, how many of those stories have since come to life in ways that are anything like the stories children dream of. Bran endearingly reminds us of his youthfulness at one point by referring to the tales Sansa prefers as kissing stories, while he favours those that centre around battles. Only one character appeals to both of their preferences at the same time, only one who checks off all the boxes for both Bran and Sansa, while also inspiring singers, historians, knights, romantics, or anyone who loves a good story. A legend, one of the most famous in all the history of Westeros, Prince Aemon the Dragonknight. Prince Aemon Targaryen was born in 136 to Prince Viserys Targaryen and Lara Rogaire of the free city of Lys, a city rooted deep in Valyrian culture. Prince Viserys was only 13 or 14 when Aemon was born, a young father even by Westerosi standards, and this wasn't even his first, as Aemon's brother Aegon preceded him by about half a year. It is reported that Aegon, the future Aegon IV, not yet 2 years of age, was found beating his infant brother with a dragon's egg, a portent for their relationship going forward, and quite ominous to the realm at large given that the Dance of the Dragons had ended only 5 years prior. If Targaryen princes are already fighting in the cradle, what would they do in 20 years as adults with hatched and grown dragons? Though Aemon's relationship with his brother was never easy, thankfully, the realm never found out what they would be like with dragons. Within 2 decades, there were no more dragons at all for House Targaryen. But there was a Dragon Knight, a nickname that came from the distinct 3-headed dragon helm and crest he wore. And it wasn't just a dangerous-sounding moniker. He grew up to be the finest sword in the realm, knighted at age 17 and given Dark Sister to wield by his uncle, King Aegon III. A lot changed for House Targaryen in this era. Not only were the dragons gone, but most of the adult Targaryens were killed in the dance or died soon after. This led to a need to re-justify the Targaryen doctrine of exceptionalism, penned in the time of the old King Jaehaerys, that stated that the Targaryens didn't have to live by the rules of the Seven like everyone else. They were different, and didn't have to obey the rules everyone else did when it came to incest, polygamy, and ruling. Why? Well, because dragons, that's why. A simplified version of the argument was spread about. The Seven clearly are okay with how the Targaryens live because they'd strike them down otherwise. So they can marry each other and do all their Valyrian Dragonlord business, and that's that. Anyone who pushed the argument further would find themselves at a literal dead end. Why? Well, because dragons, that's why. You can't argue with that. But that logic clearly collapses in a dragonless world. The basis for their exceptionalism was gone. House Targaryen wasn't done for, however, and got ahead of this critical problem through 2 central methods. 1, by embracing the Seven to a degree much greater than before, and 2, by proving they were still a military force to be reckoned with, even without dragons. Both of these qualities were embodied to their utmost perfection by Prince Aemon the Dragonknight. He was apparently as pious as he was dangerous, qualities that led him to be named to the Kingsguard at an early age and eventually Lord Commander. His brother Aegon was dangerous too, though not so much as a warrior, and he was not pious at all. However, their sister Nerys, there were the 3 siblings, was also as devout as they come, we're told. She loved the Seven, and she loved her brother Aemon, and he loved her in return. But it was Aegon whom she had to marry, and Aegon who eventually became king, and if anything, he had the opposite qualities. He was cruel, greedy, and saw nothing sacred about matters of faith, or anything really. This was, after all, the king who became known as Aegon the Unworthy. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, for although his relationship with his siblings is central to understanding Aemon, Aegon was the last of 5 kings in whose Kingsguards he served. The longest reign of the 5 was Aegon III, who sat on the throne for 26 years. During that reign, Nerys married Aegon as she was expected to, and near the end of that long tenure, she gave birth to her first child. It was the year 153, and they named him Daeron. He would eventually be crowned Daeron II. Only 4 years later, Aegon III died, and his son Daeron I was crowned. So yes, that means that there were 2 Daerons and 2 Aegons at the same time here. Targaryen naming conventions can get confusing. Though that would not last long, because King Daeron I's reign was short. Almost as soon as he was crowned, he set about invading Dorne. He loudly stated that they didn't need dragons, and proved it, somewhat. There was no doubt about Prince Aemon in all this, who distinguished himself in the war by fighting alongside the king, who apparently led from the front, at least sometimes. This would have been quite a sight to see, since King Daeron wielded Blackfire in battle, and Prince Aemon wielded Dark Sister. Side by side, the 2 Targaryen blades dealt death to Dornishmen in the deep deserts. But Dorne was not intimidated by dragons. So why would they fear swords, even fancy ones? Still, their bravery and expertise in local warfare was not sufficient this time. They realised they could not defeat Daeron and Aemon and the rest in open combat after all, and turned to other means. A poisoned arrow was fired at King Daeron at some point, but the Dragon Knight blocked it with his own body. He managed to survive, but it seems to have been close. He had to return to King's Landing to heal. While he was out of action, the Dornish threw off the Iron Throne's yoke, revoking their forced surrender and resuming the war. Daeron was quick to respond, and by the time his army was prepared, Aemon was ready to fight by his side again. Daeron's strategic abilities were as exceptional as his support staff, and it wasn't long before the Dornish sued for peace a second time. They asked to meet and discuss terms. Daeron agreed, but it was a trap. The Dornish used the parley as a cover for an ambush, and though the Dragon Knight slew 2 foes, this time their assassination attempt succeeded. King Daeron lay dead on the field, with 2 other Kingsguards slain at his side. Prince Aemon did not die beside his king, though it's not unlikely he felt it to be exactly what he deserved. He was captured and held in captivity by House Will, a house known for their extreme violence, especially towards House Targaryen. It was they who made Orys Baratheon into Orys One Hand. You can recall that Orys got his revenge on the son of the Lord Will who did that to him by removing not just the one hand, but the other, and his feet. It would not have been a surprise then to see House Will further the cycle of violence by maiming Prince Aemon in a similar manner. Instead, they hanged him in a crow cage in the desert above a pit of vipers. He may not have known it at the time, since his captors probably kept it to themselves, but help was on the way. The source of the help may not have been unexpected, but the means were. King Daeron was quite young when he died and had no children, so the throne passed to his brother Baelor, and the new king Baelor immediately set out to atone for his brother's war, by walking from King's Landing all the way to Sunspear barefoot with a peace offer to be sealed via marriage. At last, the realm could be united by peaceful means instead of conquest. Prince Aemon thus must have been as stunned as he was horrified when he saw King Baelor walking towards his cage, intent on freeing him, despite the danger of the vipers. This is a man who was willing to die to save his king, and the stakes were much higher this time. Because if Baelor the Blessed died before the peace treaty could be agreed to, there would be no peace at all. House Targaryen would surely go to war again if a Dornishman slew King Baelor. He managed to talk Baelor into leaving him, that his life surely wasn't important enough to risk another full-scale war. Baelor reluctantly agreed, but assured them all that he would return. And he did. He went all the way to Sunspear, where the marriage of Prince Daeron and Princess Miriam Martell was agreed to, and then he turned around and walked all the way back. Now, keep in mind, most of Dorne didn't want Baelor dead. They'd lived through a number of aggressive Targaryen monarchs, invasions, dragons, etc. You'd think they'd like the idea of a pacifist neighbour for once, and from what we're told, quite a few in Dorne saw the wisdom in that. But House Will is different. They were told to leave Baelor be, but kept to the letter of that order rather than the spirit of it. Aemon knew this, but this time there was no talking Baelor out of a rescue attempt. The Wills, of course, didn't try to stop him, they just laughed and handed him the key. And Baelor walked straight up to the cage to unlock it, apparently unconcerned with the vipers around his feet. But they were certainly concerned with him, and he was repeatedly bitten before he managed to unlock the cage with Aemon in it. Aemon had been starved and left to waste away for weeks, if not months, but his king was collapsing now in front of him from those snake bites. Somehow, he climbed to the top of the cage while holding Baelor over his shoulder and jumped clear of the pit, an astonishing feat given how fatigued and weak he must have been after so much exposure. But wherever he found that strength, he had enough left to continue north after jumping. He had no time to rest. The king was dying of poison. Thankfully, Baelor recovered over the next 6 months, and it must have been a great relief to the realm and Aemon himself. And most of Baelor's reign appears to have been a positive time for the Dragon Knight. Though his rule was erratic and many decisions ill-considered, there was no war. Aemon, however, probably had other things on his mind, as his sister Nerys, who he loved, remember, despite her being married to his brother, delivered stillborn twins in the first year of Baelor's reign. Though she was in ill health and spirits after this, and never robust in the first place, Aegon continued to press her for more children. King Baelor intervened, in a manner of speaking, by choosing Aegon to go on an ambassadorial mission to Braavos. This was likely when Aemon was raised to Lord Commander of the Kingsguard as well. His predecessor was probably slain in Dorne, perhaps during the ambush parley. Aemon and Nerys were thus free of their awful brother for a spell, while he predictably fathered more children in Braavos. By this time, Aegon already had a number of bastards, and he was nowhere near finished on that account. There were so many that we can't even be sure of the number. On the other hand, when Baelor died after a 10-year reign, he had no children at all. He had famously shunned a marriage to his sister Dana and fasted himself to death after she had a bastard with another man whom she refused to name. Years later, it was revealed that Aegon himself was the father of this child called Daemon Waters, only to be later renamed Daemon Blackfire. But in the short term, it made the hand of the king Viserys II the new king. But his reign lasted less than a year and a half, so Aegon, the man with so many bastards, in turn became the new king Aegon IV. And in quite an astonishing example of hypocrisy, early in his reign, Aegon started accusing his sister-wife Queen Nerys of infidelity herself, claiming that their son, Prince Daeron, was not his at all, but the child of the Dragon Knight. To add to the confusion, Aegon didn't start making these accusations until Prince Daeron was a full-grown man of perhaps 20, and he never technically removed him as his heir, which he surely would have done if he had proof. So, did Aemon break his vows with Nerys? The truth is, we don't know. Just because King Aegon was an awful man doesn't mean he's lying here, and even if Aemon is not the father of Daeron, it doesn't mean that Aemon and Nerys didn't have a romantic relationship. They clearly did care very deeply about each other. There are clearly some rich parallels here in A Song of Ice and Fire. Aemon and Nerys were brother and sister, Kingsguard and Queen, like Loras and Marjorie Tyrell. In both cases, the Queen was protected by her valorous brother, in part from the king himself. But Aegon IV would have us believe that they were more like Jaime and Cersei. To be fair, this does fit pretty well, given how much Robert Baratheon has in common with Aegon the Unworthy, and these are Targaryens we're talking about, meaning they aren't disgusted by incest like most people. Still, both Aemon and Nerys seem to have been highly pious individuals, and it appears that they were the sincere sort, not the cynical type. Perhaps they slept together just before Nerys' enforced marriage to Aegon in a moment of weakness. Daeron was the result, and Aemon joined the Kingsguard shortly after by way of penance. We don't know, but that would make sense. Perhaps even they never knew for sure if Daeron was theirs, and Aegon only started the rumours when he started thinking about the succession himself and compared Darren to his own grown-up bastard children? We'll probably never know for sure. In any event, it all came to a head when King Aegon's catspaw, Sir Morkill Hastwyck, made a formal accusation against Nerys. Prince Aemon was quick to challenge this accusation and slew Sir Morkill in a trial by combat. A major backfire for King Aegon. Now, in the sight of gods and men, Queen Nerys' innocence was proven, as was Aemon's. Even a king can't overrule the gods. Perhaps Aegon would have been better to get a better fighter to accuse Nerys. Even in middle age, the Dragon Knight was fearsome. One other time, Aemon entered a tourney as a mystery knight so as to name Nerys the Queen of Love and Beauty. He supposedly did this because his brother was planning on giving the laurel to one of his mistresses, which would be a bit of a slap in the face to his queen. Aemon, of course, won the tourney, and Nerys' honour was protected. It is stories like these that appealed to both Bran and Sansa years later, so let's tell one more to underline the character of the man. One day, King Aegon IV came upon one of his mistresses, Bethany Bracken, abed with one of the White Cloaks, Sir Terence Toyne. King Aegon had the night pulled apart slowly while forcing Bethany to watch. In revenge, Sir Terence's brothers ambushed the king. Aemon the Dragonknight was there to save his king's life again, and died in the process. He appears not to have hesitated for a second, despite the fact that the man he died to protect was arguably the worst king in the history of Westeros, had consistently harmed the woman he loved and slandered her. Aemon had sworn an oath, and to him that meant more than the man on the throne. It represented a standard for others to follow. The Kingsguard doesn't choose the king, they protect him. Prince Aemon was a man of duty, and a knight of the Kingsguard who dies in battle while protecting the king can be said to have truly fallen in the line of duty. That and the fact that he was successful in his last stand helps explain why he is arguably the most beloved and heroic member of House Targaryen in world. Almost everyone seems to talk about him in an almost awed, reverential way. We may have more nuanced views of him, but in the story, even the young members of House Stark seem to love Prince Aemon the Dragonknight more perhaps than any of their own ancestors of legend or recent memory. The sheer weight he carries in A Song of Ice and Fire, despite having been dead for so long, is compelling enough, but we're sure to see even more parallels emerge in the long run as the rest of the story unfolds. As well as the Jaime and Cersei echoes, there's also Maester Aemon, of course, who was named after Aemon the Dragonknight and also chose duty over love. But to know more, we'll have to wait for Blood and Fire, aka Fire and Blood Part 2, which will cover the period Prince Aemon lived. It's even conceivable we'll see him with Dark Sister and his famous three-headed dragon helm on TV someday. We can but hope for both. If you'd like to see more videos like this, diving deep into George R. R. Martin's world of Ice and Fire, there's a playlist now on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.